The dawn came thin and gray over Winterfell, a slow light that did not so much brighten as reveal. It drew out the shapes of things that had been there through the night. The squat, massive keeps with their slanted slate roofs, the barbican crouched like a squat, old dog in the rime, the loom of the first keep rising from snow and shadow. The steam that coiled up from the hot springs made ghosts against the ramparts, soft and living, shifting in currents I could track. Beneath the weirwood the snow lay clean. Around its red roots the earth was dark and warm and smelled faintly of iron and leaf rot. And even at that hour there were crows in the oaks beyond, making low, knowing sounds as if the day were a thing they had tasted already and found to their liking. Theon Greyjoy stood beneath the weirwood and watched his breath turn to smoke. He had not slept more than a handful of hours. The rooms that had once been Rob's and then his had felt tight and overheated, and the phantom weight of a crown he did not own but would not set aside had held to the back of his skull. He had dreamed of the sea, always the sea when his sleep ran shallow, of lead-gray swells lifting a clinker-built hull, of oarlocks creaking in steady measure and the salt rising in his mouth like a psalm. He woke to the creak of wood and the hiss of pipes, to the smell of bread from the kitchens and wet wool and horse. He woke guilty and proud and angry and very much alive. The weirwood's face did not soften for him. The red leaves stirred, whispering against one another in a small constant voice, and the carved eyes were redder yet where the sap bled. He had come here as a ward and learned to be unseen. He had hid behind that trunk once while Bran loosed arrows at knots and squirrels, while Ser Roderick's beard bristled in instruction and a little lordling's lip jutted in concentration. He had laughed then and been cuffed. Remember, he told himself, and wondered who it was giving the command. Prince. Wex stood at his shoulder. The boy's mouth had its old twist. He tapped 2 fingers against his throat and jutted his chin toward the ramparts. Snow flecks clung to his eyelashes. Theon could read him well as a book now. I hear you, he said. We'll go up. Tell Black Lauren to turn his men from the west wall to the south, and send Agur to the stables. I want the courtyard clear by sunup. Wex darted away without sound. He left a narrow chain of prints crossing the godswood and vanishing between the trunks. Theon turned back to the face and the red tears, to the dark pool that caught a skin of pale sky, and wondered for a breath if it would answer him with a rustle that meant something he could use. The leaves stirred, but not for him. He climbed to the ramparts through the warmth that slept in the stones. The pipes had been set in some age of mind and craft lost to every man alive, and the walls of Winterfell drank heat like mead and gave it back in the long cold months, so that a man's bones did not turn to glass and a woman's fingers could still work a needle when the wind carried knives in its hands. Theon had once been half in love with those pipes, with the idea of them, with secret things. He understood now he had been half in love with the comfort of knowing men cleverer than himself had made their mark here and died and been forgotten while the warmth did its work. On the wall the wind came from the east, smelling of the river and the timber stand beyond the winter town. A few houses still smoldered there, throwing up thin plumes that the dawn made blue. He had not ordered the torches last night, only allowed them. Men had taken it as permission. The line between order and allowance lived only in the head of the man who drew it, and there were those in his service to whom each looked the same. He would have to mark the difference in something other than talk. Black Lauren's men stamped along the parapet, iron studs knocking hollow on stone. They were poorly slept. None of them slept well now. There were horns in the night and a drum sometimes, and once the long rolling voice of a hunting cry from far in the trees that had made even the boldest pause with their cups at their lips. They had a quality of hunger to them, not only the belly's kind. Theon knew that hunger. He was made of it. Prince, Lauren said. The wind had rouged his cheeks. The hair in his beard had ice in it that made a stiff tinkling sound when he moved his jaw. The watch on the south saw horsemen at first light. They came out of the trees and then went in again. No move made. Theon leaned out past the crenellation and drew in the cold. Mummers show, he said. They want our eyes to keep to that edge. They've had no joy at the west or north. The ground lies against them and the ditch we cut is good work. They aren't fools. That's not the word I'd use, Lauren said. His laugh had no humor in it. They're winter men, dogs. They'll worry a bone for a month if they think there's marrow left. They've found bones before. Theon glanced down into the inner ward, where smoke lifted in gentle ropes from the kitchens and the smith's bellows throbbed an even heart. He could see the tops of women's heads bobbing as they crossed from the bakehouse to the buttery with baskets on their hips, the slope of a man's shoulder under 3 shirts as he hauled cords of wood toward the great keep. There was life enough here that the wolves at the walls would never forget. We'll give them something to choke on if they try the gate. Loren's mouth twisted. He had his sword hung low, the way the old reavers did, and a long thin dagger set crosswise at the small of his back where a man's hand might go when grasping for him. Theon had watched him fight a dozen times and never once seen him flinch. When he disliked a plan, he did not hide it. He did not do Theon the courtesy of hiding much at all. The gate's the gate. Each time they've come for it, they've been sent back with holes for eyes. You plan to keep them coming? I mean to keep them guessing. Theon let the wind take his hair back. Whispers of its salt-scented cousin slipped up from some deep place in him and were gone. Get your archers off the south and set them on the towers along the inner court. I want 3 men at each murder hole with linstocks ready. If they come, we'll give them steam enough to boil their lungs. If they don't, they'll have to wonder if we can do it when it matters. Loren snorted softly. Steam. He rolled the word with a Southlander's contempt for tricks. We're ironborn. We are, Theon said. And we are in Winterfell. Loren looked at him then, the long quiet look of a man measuring another against something unseen. Theon let him measure. When the older man looked away, he spat through the crenel, and the spittle went in a neat curve and vanished toward the ditch. You should see to Agur. He took a pot to the knee last night. It's swelling and the maester says it will go stiff if he doesn't walk on it. He'll try to lie. He always was a lazy sod. I'll see him, Theon said, after I've seen the maester. Loren's mouth made its humorless shape again. The crow wants you? His eyes flicked to the godswood. He'll tell you to make peace. He usually does. And you'll tell him? That I mean to live, Theon said and left the wall. He crossed the inner ward slow enough to be seen and spoke to those who met his eye. He set his hand on the head of a boy standing on 2 upturned cups to reach the hinge of a shutter and told him good work. He paused by the smithy and watched sparks bite at air as a bent nail was straightened. He nodded to the kennelmaster, who had lost a finger to a winter hound and wore the stump tied with red cloth as if it were a charm. He did these things not because they changed anything in the ground or the sky, but because they marked a shape. There had to be a shape to what he was doing. Otherwise, it was all violence and wanting. In the maester's turret, the air was warm and full of the smells of soot and dried things to ward off rot. The ravens in their jesses rattled at his entrance, then settled. Maester Luwin looked older than Theon remembered him on any other morning. Perhaps it was only the hour. He had slept in his chair again, with a blanket thrown haphazard over his legs and an ink smear on his cheek as if a line of words had tried to escape his pen and made instead for his face. When the old man saw him, he collected himself in a series of these little motions that told Theon more than any speech could. He still had dignity. It cost more each day. You were in the godswood, Luwin said. Have you prayed? I stood, Theon said. That's what I know how to do there. You could kneel, Luwin said. I kneel to no tree. Theon moved to the window slot and looked down at the hooks where carcasses hung. The day would struggle toward brightness, and by noon the snow on the leads would ripen and slide, and by afternoon the light would thin to iron. You sent for me. Lord Wyman has sent his terms. Luwin's fingers made fussy, careful work of the wax seal. He turned the letter so the kraken in the corner caught the thin light. He wishes the boys return to him if they yet live. He watched Theon's face as he said it. If they do not, he wants their bones and the skulls and all that died with them. The room constricted. Theon put one hand flat to the stone to feel its warmth move into him. It did not. The warmth had no sympathy, only a habit of flowing from hot to cold. It had done so long before Aegon, long before Brandon the Builder, long before men knew the words to call themselves anything but men. What else? Theon said. A full tally of those who died here, whether Northmen or Ironborn, so that their kin may set candles and say the right words. 6 hostages from among your men and 5 from among the small folk, to guarantee the terms. A year's worth of the harvest that remains to feed White Harbor if it must. You in chains. The rest, protections for the people of the winter town, who are hungry and cold. Safe passage for those who wish to leave. Luwin looked down at the neat black on the thick paper. An end to the hanging of men at the gate and the showing of their bodies. When he looked up, his eyes were very steady, and they had in them a thing like grieving and a thing like anger. I told them we do not hang our dead at the gate. I told them we are not that, even now. We set them below the gate, at the ditch, Theon said, where the wind can find them. We are not that. Luwin folded the letter with a breath that lifted the hair at his temples. You can answer, Theon. You can say yes to this. And then what? He did not make it a question. You live, Luwin said. For a little. Theon moved to the small table with its neat stacks of books and its little brass thing that told the time by shadow. A thin line crawled from one stamped mark to another. They will try to take my head. I have made a great many enemies in a very small space. And if not that, then the drowned god will have me. Do you suppose my father forgets? You are not a prayer bead to be counted. Luwin lifted his chain with one hand, the links chiming softly. You are a man. You can choose. I have chosen. Theon smiled without kindness and without pleasure. Yesterday, the day before, the first day, I choose each morning. There's your blessing and your curse, Maester. It doesn't stop. Luwin was silent until the ravens took up a little restless mutter, feathers rasping. I had thought, he said at last, to tell you that Ser Roderick would have counseled you to parley. He believed in words. He used to say that words were a way of setting a table, and you could move men to sit, to take bread, even enemies. But I will not use the dead to prop my argument. He set his hand on the open page before him as if to keep it from lifting. I will say only that the north is great and the winter is long. You cannot hope to hold this place by fear alone. The small folk must eat. They must keep their fires lit. They must not be made your enemies. I know something about the small folk, Theon said. He thought of a miller's wife and her boys, of their hands, and the way the older had put his arm before the younger without knowing it, as some animals do when a hawk stamps its shadow on the ground. I know they will turn to those who keep them alive. Then keep them alive, Luwin said. And when you are given terms you can accept them. There is no shame in living. Show me the letter. Theon held out his hand, but the maester folded the paper once more, twice, and slipped it beneath a stone. No. After you have spoken with Asha. He went cold at that and angry at the same time, the two things striking together to make a little hiss in him like fat on an iron. She's here. In your father's faith the sea chooses and judges, Luwin said. In ours the gods see all. In both faiths, a sister cares for a brother. She arrived before dawn. She did not come alone. The gates. You posted men at the posterns, Luwin said mildly. They know her. She came with no more than 10. They carry no banners. She sent me word and I sent to you. I am old, Theon. It takes me longer to move. He was already moving. The world narrowed to the slope of the stair and the place where his boots struck and the breath in his throat. 10 was no more than a hand with its fingers splayed. 10 might be an ally or one more problem at a table too full of problems. 10 could cause a mutiny or quiet one, could lift a cup or spill a cask. The outer yard was bright now with that iron pale light that made every edge look sharper than it was. The steam from the laundry rose in rich clouds and blew sideways in a clean white lane. Theon crossed through it and into the kennel yard and found her under the sheds where the reek of straw and old piss made the snow-hung air thick. Asha Greyjoy wore a plain gray cloak with a hood that threw her eyes into shade. She had thrown the hood back now. Her hair made a wet rope down her back, and there were bits of thawed snow clinging to it like ornaments. She looked him over like a man might look over a horse in a strange stall, curious and judging, a little amused, and not at all sentimental. "Brother," she said, "or should I kneel?" "If it would bring more men," Theon said, "I'd let you keep your knees." A smile cut across her, quick, like a fish leaping. She took him by the forearms and kissed his cheeks, one then the other, rough and swift. Her hands smelled of iron and of the sea and of campfire. "You're thin. That's good. A fat man in a siege eats his own strength." He swallowed words that wanted to rise. He looked past her to the men she had brought. He knew Carl the maid in his black, the sword at his hip plain and well-worked. He knew Tris Botley by his long, deep mouth and the way his eyes slid to measure. Tris had wanted to marry her and she had laughed. The others were picked men, not the feckless boys who'd come at the promise of a sack. Their boots were sound, their hands were not shaking. 10 might be worth 30 of the others. "You've made enemies," Asha said, following his glance past the kennel yard to the outer wall where Ironborn paced in 2s and 3s with their hands tucked under their armpits against the cold. "You've made them among our own, and among those who lit the candles for you once when you were a pretty hostage and played at wolf." "You came to scold me," Theon said. "You crossed the winter woods in the dark to wag your finger." "I came because you did not leave when I told you to," Asha said. "Because you have a castle around you where you should have a ship, and because that castle has wolves at the door. Because the north is rising, Theon, truly rising this time. Not for a king's prog or a quarrel over who sits where at a feast. For blood." She lifted a hand and let it fall. "And because I am your sister, and you are a fool I love, and fools fall off walls when no one holds them by the belt." "What did you bring?" he said. "A belly of salt beef, coils of hemp, 2 barrels of pitch. Men who can see at night and hit a broadside at 30 paces and won't spend their silver on Wintertown girls while the enemies of our blood whistle outside. And counsel if you want it." She tilted her head, considering the first keep with the care of a burglar weighing a window latch. "You've hurt them and you've frightened them. They'll burn you for both if they can. If you mean to stay, you need more than fear." "Everyone keeps telling me that," Theon said. The maester's letter to that effect was sweet enough to rot teeth out of a mouth. "Luwin is not a fool," Asha said. "He's half a Stark and half a Raven and almost a man. What does Wyman want?" Theon hesitated, then told her. He watched the near-invisible movement of her eyes as she counted. "Hostages," she said. "He wants men from your crew. That's smart. That splits you. He wants the small folk too. That's smarter. It splits the castle. He wants your head most of all. He's the fat one. The fat one who holds the river," Theon said. "And ships. Whose ships are not made for war. Not in this season," Asha said. "And who will not want to lose them. He'll offer more terms if you hold. He'll grow gentler if he starts to fear he'll look foolish. And he fears that more than he fears the drowned god. Let him wait. Don't talk to him unless you can do it while showing him something burning that he thought could not burn. That's how you talk to fat lords." "And what about the wolves?" Theon said. "Umber, Tallheart, Serwyn. They have dogs and axes and they're hungry. They'll try you at night and in storm and on a day when you think it too beautiful to raise your voice. They'll try you always." "They will," Asha said. "So you make your sometimes. You show them it will never be enough. You make this place bite, not like Ironborn, not with rage and straight-on valor and the songs you love. They've heard those songs for 3,000 years. Make them bite here, with pipes and steam and a gate that opens and shuts like a mouth. With alleys in the winter town that throw fire sideways. With a well that holds not water but black. With walls within walls, so when they think you are in their hands, you are in their teeth." She leaned in. "And you do it without breaking the people who have to live here when you are gone. That's the trick." "Gone," Theon said, tasting the word. It was both bitter and sweet, like a ship's biscuit wet with rain. "You mean me dead?" "I mean you gone from this place," Asha said. "If you live to leave, you win. If you leave them nothing but bone and ash, you might as well have died. A man can live with enemies." He cannot live with nothing. Theon stood very still for a time. The warmth of the walls rose through his boots and into his shins. He listened to the scrape of a kennel door on its iron and a bitch's low growl as she nosed her litter. He listened to the faint, continuous sound the ravens made when they were awake and trying not to speak. "Come," he said, and led her toward the gate. They walked the walls. He showed her where the ditch ran wide and where they had lined it with sharpened stakes cut from alder and willow. He showed her the belts of rope strung with brass bells set low at knee height where a man trudging through snow might press and wake a perimeter with their sound. He showed her the murder holes cut above the sally port and the channels that would pour scalding water, and then, when the steam and screams had done their first work, pitch. He showed her where he had moved barrels of broken brie, CK to throw on men's heads, and where he had set casks of sand to smother the flames when the arrows came with their tiny, unwavering lights. He showed her the inner gate, which he had tightened with new pins and braced with the trunks of 2 trees cut from the far side of the godswood. And he showed her the winter town, the narrow lanes and the squares, the rows of empty houses with their shutters nailed, the lofts lying in wait above their alleys like hidden cliffs. He showed her lines of pitch drawn on the ground by a boy with a poor sense of straight, and the casks that would feed them. Asha looked and nodded sometimes and sometimes only watched. At last she said, "Good, this is good. This is a trap you can live inside." "It has to be a home too," Theon said, surprising himself. "It does," she said. "If you want the people to work. If you want the children to look at you when the horns blow and not cry." They went down into the kitchens then and ate with the women at the long tables. He took bread with his knife and slathered it with dripping, and the fat came onto his fingers, and he licked it off like a boy not to waste it. Asha told a story about a storm so fierce they had to lash their men to the oars, and even then watched one slip and go silent under the water in the length of a breath. And the women laughed without much mirth and nodded in that way women do when men tell their hard stories, and they returned to their bread and their work. When Theon said he wanted hot stones for the murder holes before noon, the oldest of them said, "You'll get them, my prince," without hesitation, and he could not decide if the title in her mouth was mockery or hope or both. In the late morning he found Agur, as Lauren had told him, standing with his knee stiff near the armory door, watching his own discomfort like a man watches a fire he cannot set aside, fascinated by its purity. "Walk," Theon said. "Now, with me. Bring your spear. When it hurts, breathe into it like you're stoking a brazier. If you let it go cold, it will limb you." Agur swore and obeyed. They did 2 circuits of the yard in silence. Theon breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth the way the maester had once taught Bran. There was some relief in putting one foot before the other and finding the world still had the shape of that simple task. He could walk forever if the walking kept meaning. When Agur's face turned green, Theon called a halt, clapped him on the shoulder, and sent him to find the maester to have the puffed place bound again, low and tight with wool. By afternoon the sun showed as a pale coin behind high cloud and then vanished. The sound of an axe in the distant woods carried on the stillness of the air. Then came the long horn that meant horse, and then another nearer and lower that meant ready. Theon was on the wall before the 3rd note died. On the edge of the trees a line of riders had come out and halted, umbermen by their shields, green with the roaring giant in chains painted black, and some with the hand of the umbers pinned at the wrist by an iron spike. They made a point of being careless. The riders laughed with their heads back and their throats bared to the sky as if there were no arrows in the world. He counted 20, which meant 50. They stood a time watching, then turned their horses as one and went back into the trees. It might have been a courtesy call. It might have been a map. "Lauren," Theon said, and the man was there. "Tell Iskard he is to keep 3 on the bells at all times, even if his fingers crack and bleed. If a bell does not sing when it should, I'll take a ring from the man's ear and hang it where he'll remember better." Lauren grunted. "You would," he said, without judgment. "I will," Theon said. They came at night, just before moonrise, when the world was dark as soot and smelled of coal and ice. The first sign was the trembling of a low bell somewhere near the ditch beyond the south wall. a note so light a man might have mistaken it for his own pulse. Theon had been half asleep in his chair, the shape of the room familiar now even in blank dark, the rise and fall of a fire's breath against his cheeks like the breath of a kind horse. He went from chair to door without knowing how. The horn blew once and again, clipped, careful, as if it were trying not to wake someone. He ran. On the wall the air hit him hard. He used fists and elbows to push men aside until he could see. Darkness within darkness. Then, because his eyes were trained now to that particular confusion, shapes moved within it, darker yet, the size of men, moving with that hush men carry when they mean to offer their knives to sleeping throats. He had placed men in the inner towers with iron pots half full of water and stones. He could smell the heat. Now, he said, and a half-dozen men loosed crossbow bolts with the soft twang of bent wood releasing. A shape in the dark jerked and fell, and another stumbled and then straightened. "Throw," Theon said. The first pot went and made a sound when it struck like a man's breath catching, an oof of stone against wood, and then it split and the steam came up in a cloud that glittered in starlight no one could see, and men screamed as the water found their eyes and slid into their mouths and going down tore up the soft places of their throats iron-hot. More pots, and the sounds multiplied. Theon had expected his own men to sound mad. It was the men below who did. It sounded like nothing he had heard at sea. It was worse. He set his jaw and kept his eyes to the dark. When the first fire arrow lifted with small courage toward the parapet, he had his men throw the sand. It hissed and went black and cold at once, dead as a fish after a wave throws it high and leaves it on the sand. They tried the gate after, because that is what men do. They came with a ram made of a green trunk thick as a man's waist and went down into the ditch and found the stakes with their legs, the points sliding between bone and the meat. Men cried out and were held upright by those stakes as if by lovers, and the men behind them pushed and did not mean to and then did mean to keep the shape of their company. And when the near men threw grapple hooks, they bit only into the outer lip of the ditch, not to the wall. Theon waited through the long minutes where the ram found the ground and the men found their rhythm, and the men at the murder holes above him breathed like horses. When the ram had made 5 strikes, he lifted his hand. "Now," he said, and the water tipped. It went down not as a sheet but as the first of a series of falls, steaming in the night, hot enough to strip skin from a hand, hot enough to make a man step in his own mind through a dozen summers at once he had not had. The ram dropped. In the smoke and steam men hauled it back instinctively. Arrows came from the towers in a measured rain. He could not see his men's faces, but he knew them. In the night, the Ironborn had one virtue over the North. They were accustomed to fighting at a sound under blackness, accustomed to the feel of a blade guided by echoes, by breath. When Umber men tried to run the ditch, Ironborn caught them with short swords where they were nearest to the wall, so that their bodies might be pushed across and make an uneven bridge for the next men's boots. Theon did not order that. He watched it done. He told himself he would remember the name of the man who had thought of it and said it in a low voice and made others obey without their knowing. He did not learn the name that night. By the time the moon put a thin blade above the trees, the yard stank of wet wool and piss and the cooked meat smell he tried not to name. He left the wall and went slowly down and went through the outer yard to the ditch because he had promised himself he would go among the dead he had made while they were still warm. He did not take a torch. He did not want to see that much. The shape of bodies is enough to a man who knows shapes. He stepped through them where he could and was careful to brush no living hand with his boot. Sometimes the living play at death among their dead, and then a boot wakes them to anger. He had made vows, 1,000 of them, the kind men make to themselves in silence. One of those, made under the weirwood and unacknowledged even in the privacy of his head, had been that if he saw a boy, he would do what he could. Now he saw one. Really, he saw the smallness of the boot and then the cuff of fur at the wrist and then the idea of a boy, and then he saw him, a pale shape with his eyes shut hard. He bent and felt the cold of the skin and the heat of the breath rising small from the open mouth like a secret he had to lean down to hear. He slipped a hand under the boy's shoulders and felt the slick of blood. The boy opened his eyes, which were indeed a boy's eyes. For a moment that was all the boy was. "Hush," Theon said, in a voice he did not recognize, a man borrowing a father. I have you. Hush. Lauren found him there and made no comment. He motioned with 2 fingers and Agar came with a litter. They laid the boy in it, not because they needed to, the wound was in the thigh and small, but because it made a shape of mercy in the dark that the Ironborn would recognize as a thing done by their prince. That sort of theater mattered. It mattered to him, and he hated that it did. They took the boy to the old sept, which the Starks had allowed to stand as if in apology to the southern gods. It had its own dry warmth under its stones. Luwin met them with his sleeves tied high and his cheeks flushed. He worked fast, steady, with the calm that came from making the same motions 1,000 times and never yet believing them wasted. The boy would live. Theon left him to that and went to the wall again. In the 2nd hour of the morning, a new horn sounded, one that did not belong to the Umber men, a note that went cutting along the edge of the wood like a knife. Theon felt the hair rise on his neck. He had lifted a cup to that note before and sworn to it. Bolton, Lauren said flatly at his shoulder. Bastard, the flayed man. Theon saw them before the sun had color to it. Little movements at the edge of the dark, the suggestion of a formation that did not hold itself like a bear or a group of men with good hearts and pride, but like something that wanted to slip out of your grip and run up your sleeves and make a home there. When they came into the open, a little they showed the crimson and pale of the flayed man, the poles topped with their obscene trophies, the men holding them with faces blank as sleep. There were fewer of them than Theon had expected. That made him more watchful, not less. He had learned that a smaller party sometimes meant something you had not yet seen. The messengers came after noon, 3 of them, under a rag that might have been a white flag if it had not been dirty as any sheet ripped from a brothel bed. Theon had them kept at spear's length in the outer yard and went himself. Asha came too without being told, and he had no mind to tell her no. The middle messenger was a long-armed man with the look of a hound about him. A good hound, the sort that keeps to your heel and waits for the voice more than the hand. His hair lay flat with grease. The second was short and pale, with a mole on his lip. The third would not look at Theon at all, which made Theon look at him twice as long. Our Lord offers you safety, the long-armed one said. He knows your plight. He knows the Northmen do not love you and the White Harbor Lord wants you dead. He offers a place at his fire and a cup in his hall. He will pull this thorn from your hand. Theon laughed. He could not help it. Came out harsh and bright in the cold air. If he's my friend, he should say so under his own name, he said. He should offer me a cup I have seen him drink. He should not come in other men's skins. The long-armed man blinked once. You know him. I know a great many bastards, Theon said. Tell Ramsay Snow that if he will throw his banner in the river and lay his flays on the ground and rub them in snow until they are clean, he may come and talk with me outside the gate with no more than 3. Tell him if he comes wearing any other man's stink, I will have his messenger's hands for it. The long-armed man's eyes changed even if his face did not. The change was a very small thing, like a crease in a piece of paper that will not go flat after. He bowed. My lord will answer, he said. Do, Theon said, and take care you do not trip on your lord's leavings when you go. He has a habit of leaving messes. The bastard's men did not come to parley. They slipped into the woods again and did not show themselves for a long time. At dusk Theon heard a woman scream somewhere in the winter town, and there were flames after. Asha's men were quick across the yard and down the postern and then slow in the lanes because they had to be. The pitch lines were set and they knew it. In the morning they found a man nailed to a door with flensing hooks, left alive with his innards in a heap in his lap like a cat he'd been given to mind. Theon put a spear through his throat himself while the man looked at him as if at a brother. He ordered the door taken down and the hooks taken out and the man's body burned without much ceremony. He had the hooks cleaned with snow and lye and set them aside with the tools for downing a boar. In the afternoon, Asha came with blood on her sleeve. You cannot answer this in kind, she said. Not if you want the small folk. I won't, Theon said. He had thought of it and laid the thought down as a woman lays a knife on a table and turns away because she has a better knife at her belt. What then? We choke them with patience, Theon said. We turn the winter town to a maze. We show the upcountry lords that the bastards' men cannot make us foolish with fear. We show them we are a wall, and that the men they hate one another more. Give the maize to Carl and your 10. They move like water. Set them at the lines of pitch at night and let them make additions without telling me what. I don't want to know. If I know, it will show in my face. Asha tilted her head in that way she had that made the light slide along her cheek. You learn, she said, slowly, like a man who has had the sense beaten into him but retains affection for the beating. Don't praise me too much, Theon said. It makes me suspicious. Good. The siege turned into a thing that had a rhythm. This was how men survive hardness. They learn its pulse and tap their fingers along with it. Theon woke before dawn while the kitchen fires caught. He walked the walls. He spoke with Luwin and did not always say no to letters that asked for small mercies. He ordered the children to collect snow with the men in the outer court so that their bodies would be tired by night and their mouths would be too full of food to talk much while their parents listened for horns. He called the Ironborn to the yard and had them drill in silence, running lines with their mouths shut and their palms open. He watched their resentment and their pride war, and he encouraged both. He had Black Lauren take the worst of the men who grabbed women and set them to carrying night soil to the ditch under a guard of boys. Theon watched as the boys laughed and learned the value in that laughter as if he had known it all his life. There was a man he had to hang. He did it without shaking. The man had cut the right ear off a girl for not lifting her eyes when he passed. He had done it because he could. Theon told the men gathered in the yard that the hanging was because the man was a fool, and fools got other men killed. It was true. It was also true that the sight of that man's legs kicking made a mark in the men's minds. He did not look at the small folk faces when the man's feet found nothing. Later the kennelmaster brought him a bowl of thick stew and told him a dog had taken the man's old boot when it was cut loose and would not give it back. And Theon took that as a joke and a sacrament and made his mouth smile. Each day there were horns in the woods. Sometimes in the distance there were other horns answering, different in tone, and men standing on the walls would look at one another and make that shrug that means I do not know what that means and I am afraid to say so aloud. Once a raven came beating its wings against the tower slit with such force one of the boys cried out and Luwin chided him with a slap. The message tied to the raven's leg was from men Theon did not know, but the language had been chosen by a hand that had read in sun and snow and was sure of its verbs. It said that Lord Bolton's bastard wanted to trade a dozen prisoners for passage along the White Knife. It said that Lord Wyman had refused and had ordered the bastard's men to be put to the sword if they were taken in his lands. It said that Crowfoot Umber had lost 10 men to a trap set with pitch and had killed 3 Ironborn in the night for it. It said a woman had been found with her hair braided into her scalp in such a way that if she pulled she would pull herself bald for a week, and that she had survived and spat at the captain who cut her free and went back into her house with her head high. Theon read it and folded it and handed it back. Luwin watched him. Say what you're going to say, Theon told him. The north is a net, Luwin said. So is the sea, Theon said. A bigger one. A net does not catch wind. This place does. That will do. In the myth of himself he had made without meaning to, there would come a day when he took the field under banners and beat back an assault with a cry that would be heard by men not born yet. When the day that came instead came, it was quieter, and there were long hours of waiting like bad bread to be chewed. The weather turned in a way that every man who had lived through 2 winters knew meant a great fall was coming. The air went glassy, then soft, and then as thin as paper. The clouds went up and became a lid, and then they lowered, and the light under them grew sickly. The horns stopped. The wolves somewhere, always somewhere, kept their voices in their throats. In the afternoon, a rider from the Umber camp came out with a rag on a stick and threw down a roll of parchment bound with cheap ribbon. The ribbon was green and the wax was cracked. Theon had it taken up with a hook. He unfolded it in the yard with Asha and Luwin and Lauren looking on. The words were in a large hand that did not care for lines. They said that the Umbers were hungry and tired and that the winter would be here in a day. They said that this madness had gone long enough and that if Theon would send a barrel of wheat and a barrel of salt fish to the ditch, the Umbers would withdraw to the Treeline and let Winterfell make its own business with the bastard. They said if he did not, they would come before the snow and try to end it in an hour, and if they failed, they would return in the spring and kill him then. There was a thumbprint of grease at the bottom of the parchment. Theon could smell onion on it. Clever old man, Asha said. Theon thought of Crowfoot Umber and his missing eye and the long scars that ran the length of his arm from the day a boar went mad and decided it wanted to eat him. He wants to put me in Ramsay's teeth, he said, and he wants to be able to say he did not abandon the Stark seat to a kraken. He wants both and thinks himself wise enough to get them. He is, Luwin said. He is the North, and so is Lord Wyman, and so is House Serwyn and House Tallheart and House Hornwood. The North is not a man. It is a weave. Do not imagine you have undone them because you have loosened one knot. I won't, Theon said. We'll send him his barrels. Lauren made a contemptuous sound in his throat. Asha shot him a look that said, do not be an idiot. With, she said. Oil in the fish, Theon said. Bags of sand in the wheat, sealed in oiled cloth so the men who heft it won't feel the difference. Send them at dusk. Make sure men see. Have boys carry the second barrel. That will show what we want. What do we want them to think? Luwin said. That we are counting our wheat, Theon said. That we have enough to give. That we are not fools. When the barrels reached the ditch, the Umber men came to meet them, slow, with the tired dignity of men who have learned there are only so many ways to be proud. They fetched the barrels with iron hooks and drew them across the ditch as men on the wall watched, and men in the ditch watched, and boys in the courtyard watched, and took the shape of it to the bone so they would have it when they were old and trying to tell young men what they had seen. The Umbers opened the barrels with knives, quick, casual. If they noticed the oil, they did not show it. Later, when the snow had come and they had had to lift their tents 3 times to keep them from being buried and then had left them to bury, and the oil had spread through their stores and made torches of anything they lit, they would show it. For now they raised their hands in a rough salute toward the wall. Theon raised his hand back and did not wait to see who thought what of it. The storm came at night. The wind went from nothing to everything in a few breaths, as if someone had lifted a weight from it. The snow fell in those thick flakes that seemed to carry their own light and sound. It blew sideways and up, and it found its way under shingles and over door lintels and along the edges of boots and inside men's ears. The world went white and was emptied of shape. Men who had known this weather all their lives made the small sounds of men who are startled when something they know hits them anyway. Theon heard a woman laugh. He did not know who she was. He stood in the yard with frost building on his eyebrows and watched the world vanish. We should strike, Lauren said. He had to lean close and bellow his whisper in Theon's ear. We should take the gates and run them down and kill them while they're blind. No, Theon said. Why? Lauren said. Because we are blind as well, Theon said. And because they will expect it. And because the wind is a god and I will not raise my voice to it. We will sit and breathe. We will watch the oil. Lauren swore and stalked away, and Theon let him. He went along the inner wall and into the great keep and down into the crypts. He had never gone to the crypts alone as a boy. The carve of the stone and the shape of the dead lords' faces did something to his gut. He went now because he had told himself for 3 days he would go, and no man can live on lies fed to himself, not even a prince. The air there was warmer than the yard, and it smelled of damp and dust and a little of the hot springs that made their way even under here in small voices. He walked along the rows of stone with the candle in his hand, and the light made the dead lord's eyes bright and then dull as he passed. He had mocked these once to himself, the pride in stale bones, the way men told and retold the names. He did not mock them now. He did not love them. He understood them as he had come to understand some things. In the gut, in the knee, with the skin. At the far end, where Stark after Stark lay with a stone wolf at his feet and a sword on his belly, he stopped. He did not kneel. He lifted the candle and looked. If I hold this place, he said softly, the way a man speaks to the sea in Scam, whether because he is alone and the sea is there, what do I become? No voice answered him that was not his own. He lowered the candle. A shadow moved where no wind was. It was probably only the way the light fell on a rough place in the stone. He stood a time longer, His mind went to the boys, the two who were not Bran and Rickon. He thought of their mother. He thought of Osha, who had not come to the crypts again since that day months ago when she had walked among the dead with a child's grave respect. He thought of the bastard in the woods and the small sounds men make when they are in his hands. He blew out the candle and went back up. In the morning the snow lay 2 feet deep on the leads and more in the yard where it had drifted. The lines of the pitch glowed under it like veins under a child's skin. The men on the wall had grown white beards. Theon sent boys with drag brooms to sweep the murder holes and the arrow slits. The fat from the kitchen had gone hard and white, and the women cut it with the same knives they cut bread with. Men in the Umber camp lit fires. A thin thread of smoke rose from the trees where the bastards' men crouched. By noon a sound came through the storm like a man retching. Then another. Theon smiled a little and did not show it to any man. They came at dusk, the bastards' men, in 2s and 3s, alive with the storm, working their way along the pitch lines as if they had been born to them. Carl and his 10 were already there. The first man to put his boot in the line sank knee-deep in snow, and the pitch took him at the ankle, and he yelled a warning or a prayer. The wind took it away. The torch that came next went down on its side and made a small guttering noise, then a roar. The fire ran along the line so fast it looked like something alive. It leaped to the houses as it had been taught, and the houses answered. The flame's color in that air was not the wild gold Theon loved. It was blue and then white at the hottest. It rolled sideways and up the walls, and then it went out. The snow put it out. It lived only long enough to make itself a sign in the men's minds. Theon felt them feel it even from the wall. He felt the bastard feel it too, wherever he crouched with his men, and for a moment he believed he knew the turn of the other man's mouth, the slight bitterness in it when something that should have gone right had not. The Umbers pulled away. It was not a rout. They lifted their tents as they had promised, and they took their dead and they went into the trees. The bastards' men stayed in their holes. The winter town smoldered. Theon looked across the yard and saw Asha looking at him with approval that cost her nothing and meant much. That night he slept for 4 hours and dreamed of none of it. He dreamed instead of Pike, of the stacks rising black above a gray sea, of his father's hands like lengths of rope, of his father's mouth parting for the first time to say well done. When he woke he lay still and held the feeling as a man holds a coal in his palm. It burns, but it is heat. Then he shook it out and rose. When the snow stopped, the air went razor clear. Each thing had a line around it now. There was no blur to be had. Theon walked again, counting, naming, letting the castle be a song in his mouth he did not sing aloud. He checked the crossbow stocks and the bolt heads. He looked at the casks and had each opened and smelt and heaved. He went to the laundry and thanked the girls for washing the bloody shirts, and they gazed at him with that frank stare girls give a man when he has made himself a shape in their world they have not yet decided to fear or love. He went to the rookery and had Luwin show him the birds, one by one, with their banding names and their tempers, and he stroked a raven's neck and the bird closed its eyes and croaked at him as if it knew a joke. He had Wex take him by the shoulder and show him where the boy thought the wall was weakest, and he had it braced with timbers and stone and 3 men with good backs. He sent a letter with a seal he did not examine too closely to a place no one had said aloud, Greywater Watch. He wrote in a tight hand and asked for nothing. He wrote only that the wolves were at Winter's Gate and that the Kraken stood there too, and that those who had added their silence to the Starks bent in all winds except the east might find advantage in standing now and blowing back. He did not expect an answer. He sent the letter because it made the worlds weave include him in a place where it had not before. When the answer came, as answers from that place do at night, without a visible messenger, and in a hand that looked like the track of a frog across mud, it said only, "It is remembered." He showed Asha. She laughed, delighted. "Of all the seas," she said, "you decide to fish a swamp. Men live there," Theon said. "They have lived there unburned while the north burned. You think that's an accident?" "No," she said. "I think it's a craft. And I think you might be learning craft too. I had not expected it." He did not thank her. He kept his eyes on the letter and allowed himself the smallest inward swell a man allows himself when an older sister admits He might be less a fool today than yesterday. 3 days after the storm, the bastard came again. He sent men with hooks to test the ditch. They lost 2 and went away. He sent men to the winter town to try to enter a house that had not burned, and the house turned into a hound and bit them. He sent a boy up a tree with a horn, and an umber arrow took him. At dusk, a line of men in the treeline lifted torches and lit them all at once and held them high and did not move, and the light shook on the undersides of the branches like gold on water. "Pretty," Asha said. Her breath smoked in small white plumes. "He's a man who likes his show. He wants to remind us he can count," Theon said. "He wants to put numbers in our eyes so we will take them to our beds. He wants us thinking of how much we have left." "Do you know," she said. He did. He and Luwin had counted 3 times and had made the numbers match with the stubborn patience of men who had not learned to lie to themselves and would not. "Enough," Theon said aloud. "If the small folk do not panic, then let them not," she said, and that was a challenge more complicated than the bastard's torches. Theon took it as a man takes a gauntlet from a friend. He met with the head women of the kitchens and the understewards and the men who kept the larders and the baker who had the best temper and 3 fingers missing from a childhood accident with a millstone. He told them the truth of the stores. He did not tell them too much truth about the bastards of lords, because truth used in such quantity makes women want to send their children where the truth cannot go. He told them that if there were no thefts, and if the children ate in hall with the elders, and if a bowl of stew each day could be managed for those who worked, and if the rest were content with porridge and apples, there would be not only enough but a little to give for favors. That last word made their eyes light the way a coin will. He let it. "A favor is a thing to be used with care," he said. "I am not a king you love. I know that. I am the man who can make certain men mind you while you feed theirs. Use my name to get what you need. Use it like a hammer. After the winter there will be a reckoning and prayers and tears. For now there is the fire. Keep it." They did. There were fewer fights over rations than there had been before he told them. Men who had cursed him in the yard spat and swallowed and did not speak when their wives told them what had been said in the kitchens. Asha's 10 moved at night through the winter town like weasels through hay, turning what needed to be turned and noting who thought to profit from disorder. When thieves were caught, Theon had them made to work at the hottest places with their shirts off. Some of them grew proud of the work by the 2nd week. Half pride is a seed that grows in any weather. The boy from the night fight lived and sat by the sept door every afternoon. He did not look at Theon when Theon passed. He looked at Theon's boots and not at him. That was all right. Into this tenuous order came a letter from Wyman Manderley with new terms, sweeter, as Asha had predicted. He would take 3 hostages only from among the Ironborn, and 2 from the small folk, and Theon might wear a chain, not manacles. He would guarantee the lives of the small folk and of any Ironborn who wished to leave to return to their ships. He would not insist that Theon be tried in White Harbor. He would accept him being tried by the Lord of Winterfell's chosen if that lord returned before the thaw, or he would hold him an honored prisoner until the king in the north or south decided. There was fat in the language and a strain of vanity. Theon read it twice. "He's a clever man," he said to Luwin, "and he is as frightened a man as ever ate." "That does not make him less dangerous," Luwin said. "No," Theon said. He set the letter aside. "We will not accept. We will send him thanks for his concern and tell him that Winterfell's fires are burning very well. You will call this place by its name," Luwin said mildly, and Theon's heart squeezed, then let go. He did not argue. He did not mock. "Winterfell," he said, "and we'll send him a gift." "What gift?" "A cask of apples," Theon said, "and a recipe for how the women here stew them with raisins and oats so that children think they are having cake. Write it down, maester, in a slow, fair hand. Tell him a story about a girl in the kitchens who says her little brother used to hate apples and loves them now. Make him eat that." Luwin surprised him by smiling. "You are cruel," he said without rancor. "I am clever," Theon said, "and cruel when it suits." The gift went with a guard of boys and 1 lean Ironborn. It came back with a letter of thanks and with 2 salted fish of a kind that men in the north eat as a treat and Ironborn sneer at. Theon put one in his mouth and let the salt bite. He did not sneer. There are times when a man must be a man of the harbor. On the 12th day after the storm, the bastard tried the wall again. He came from the east this time, and he brought a long line of men with ladders that they carried in a way Theon had not seen before, cradled under their arms like babies. A line of drums began, very low, and the sound of them did something to the men on the wall like a headache starting at the base of the skull. The ladders went up in a run. Theon had prepared for this. He had had the masons chip little notches along the parapet where a man might set a boot and push in a particular way, and the ladders that had been bought or stolen from men used to southern castles slid and fell back. The men on them went with their ladders, into the ditch or into the bodies at its edge. Those that held and those that made it to the lip found the stones under their hands slick, not with ice but with oil set there an hour before. The oil stank of olives and of pine and made their fingers slippery, and they smacked their hands foolishly as if at bees and fell. The archers threw down hooks to catch the ladders and pull them in, and the iron-born with the hooks grunted like fishermen pleased with the fight their catch gave. One ladder came up and over and lodged against a crenel, and a man with the flayed man painted on his chest caught the top with both hands and threw his leg over like a lover. Theon stepped forward and put his sword into the soft place above the plate before the man had a breath to call. He felt the give of fat and the tug of muscle and the little chattering sound a man makes when his body surprises him and betrays him. After, they set the captured ladder up inside the yard, and the boys climbed it and laughed. And when they reached the top, they shouted down the names of dead kings and then a few names of dogs. The women clucked at them and did not hide their own smiles. Theon stood and watched and, for a breath, allowed himself to be warmed by something he might have called joy if there had been less iron in it. They did not see the bastard that day or the next. That did not satisfy Theon. He knew enough now to know that a snake you do not see is not a snake you need not mind. He sent Wex and 2 of Asha's men into the woods by different ways with nothing that would shine. He told them not to be brave, to look, listen, and return. Wex came back the next day with his face frostbit and his eyes bright in a way Theon mistrusted. He tapped at his throat, then made the shape of a bow with his arms and let an invisible arrow fly, then touched his own mouth and then held his hands out, palms up, as if he had been given something. "Say it," Theon said gently, because Wex's silence was not the bastard's gift but some other god's. Wex shook his head and then stamped gently and tapped his breastbone and then made the arrow shape again. "Not ours," Asha said. "He's telling you house. Arrows. Tall heart." "Cave," Wex signed, which Theon recognized because he had taught it to the boy himself the day he had hidden a cask of wine in the old collapsed tunnel and wanted someone to know in case he forgot. "Cave," Wex said, very faint, and then clapped his hand over his mouth and looked terrified at what he had done. "It's all right," Theon said before he thought. He touched the boy's shoulder and felt him shaking. "Cave, men, arrows. He's hiding." "Not from us," Asha said. "From the bastard. He means to do both of us mischief." Theon thought of the cave under the old barrow 1/2 mile from the treeline where the children had used to dare each other to go in, and where once Bran had lost his cap and cried for 5 breaths before he found it and felt brave and lied about the crying. He sent men that night by the long way, the way the Crannogmen used. He told them if they saw anything at all they must return. They must not try to be men. In the morning a man came back with blood on his sleeves and his mouth grim as a cut and said flatly that there had been 20 men under the hill with arrows and salted beef and that their captain had an umber's hand sewn to his cloak. "They left at dawn," the man said. "They knew we were coming. They left a basket of bones in the cave where the fire was. Dog bones. They are laughing." "Let them laugh," Theon said. "We have a wall. They have winter." The admission was a victory, the sort a man earns after he has bled for it. Theon took that victory and set it behind a larger thing. The knowledge that men he had once hoped might overrun his wall were now making sport of him with dog's bones. He did not tell Asha not to laugh. She laughed anyway, softly, to herself, not with her mouth but with an expression of satisfied wariness, and that told him she judged the rhythm right. Luwin forbore to counsel him that day, which told Theon the old man had seen he was holding his line. There are days when not being counseled is counsel enough. At dusk a rider came from the west with a rag on a spear. He was young and tired, and his face was a chapped, wind-burnt mask. He dismounted stiffly and would not look Theon in the eye. "From Barrowton," he said, and produced a small sealed packet with a carefulness that suggested he feared it might bite. The seal was unfamiliar. A horse's head. The hand inside was clear, the ink strong. It was a woman's letter. It said, "The North does not forget, but it remembers in different ways. You have killed a man I was fond of and done injury to a house I do not love. You have shown you are more than a Reaver and less than a Stark. If more than a Reaver matters to you, you may live to see your hair go gray. There is a line to walk if your feet can find it. The bastard is not a line walker. If you make me choose between you and him, I will choose you for as long as it suits me. If you open your gates to him, I'll bury what men I can under your walls and call the rest of the winter upon you." The name at the bottom was Barbary Dustin. Theon read it twice. He handed it to Asha. Her mouth curved. "Dancing on a sword," she said, pleased. "A woman after my own heart." "Not a woman after mine," Lewin said, dry, and Theon was warmed again by the easy way the old man's wit lay to hand even when his world was a ring of ice. He sent back an answer with the boy who had brought it. He kept it short. He said that Winterfell was closed to all flayed men, and that if Lady Barbary wanted to see the bastard starve, he would oblige her. He said nothing of being more than a Reaver. The words meant too much and too little to him at once. Night fell. Asha came to him with a skin of thin wine and sat beside him under the shadow of the tower and told him the story of the first man she had killed, and how afterward she had vomited in the bilge, and how the second went easier. He told her a story about a woman he had taken to bed when he was 16, and how he had told himself afterward that he had learned something essential, and had instead learned only that he wanted to tell stories about what he had learned. They laughed, as men and women do who pretend they have no blood connection between them and then discover that the pretense is only useful sometimes, and this was not one. In the middle of the night Theon woke with the distinct feeling of eyes on him. He reached for his knife. Wex stood over him, bent nearly double with the effort not to breathe loudly. He tapped his own eyes and then the window and then made the shape of an antler with his hand and then shook his head hard to say no. And then he put his palm on his mouth and then on his heart and then on Theon's shoulder. The touches were like language. Theon sat up and pulled on his boots and went to the window. The yard was still. The sky had gone cloudless. The stars were brutal with cold. He thought he saw a shadow move near the godswood and then amended it. He wanted to have seen a shadow. He turned back and found Wex still standing very still like a little tree cut and about to be hauled. "Thank you," Theon said. Wex looked at him with terror like the first time he had failed to understand a command and thought he would be beaten. Theon reached out and did a thing he had not thought to do. He put his hand behind the boy's head and drew his brow down until it touched Theon's own. He felt Wex shake, a little quake, and then go still. "Rest," Theon said. He did not. He went to the wall instead and stood until dawn and watched the woods. The bastard did not come. The umber horns did not sound. The world made a noise like a kettle on a low fire. In that thin hour he made himself a new vow in a place where men give their vows the names of gods. He vowed he would not yield this place to fire or to fear. He would not open the gate to hope. He would make walls within himself like these walls, with warmth inside them, and with men he trusted set above each entry. He did not trust himself, so he would set other men above the entries in him. He would set Wex above one. He would set Lewin above another. He would set Asha at the sally port in him, to tell him when to go out and when to stay. It was a foolish vow. It made him feel strong. On the 20th day he sent a letter to Robb Stark. He wrote it slowly and made his hand neat. He did not use "my lord." He did not use "your grace." He used no title and no name. He wrote, "You gave me bread by your fire and I took your castle. I did it because I wanted more than bread. I did it because I did not know which brother I could be. I know now I can be the brother who mends a wall he broke. If you will have me when the winter ends, I will give you this place unburned and its people unbroken. If you will not, I will give it to whomever hates the bastard most." He sealed it with the Kraken because he had no other seal and sent it with a boy he trusted as far as any boy can be trusted. He did not expect it to reach Robb. He did not expect Robb to be alive. He sent the letter because the shape of his life required it. The days thickened. The nights came early and stayed late. Asha left and came again, each time with a small bit of food or cord or cheer she had saved from men's teeth. Sometimes she brought news, a fight among Manderly's vassals over who would go out to cut wood, a small victory near Serwyn where a raiding party had been caught in a drifts, a rumor that Lady Hornwood, poor dead woman, had been seen walking with her hair unbound and bare feet in snow. Theon listened and kept the news like small coins tucked into a purse he wore under his shirt where no one would think to search. There was a day when 2 wolves stood in the Godswood and watched the men who watched them from the wall. They were not dire wolves. They were large and their fur was starved. One had a notch in its ear. They stood a time without fear, as if they had been sent to make a point. Then they turned and went into the trees as men watched and breathed again. Theon did not speak the thought that came. If the boys live, they live as wolves do. He did not know if that was a prayer or a curse. He allowed it to be both, as so many true thoughts are. Then came the day when the bastard went too far. The foundling girl from the laundry, who had more laughter than sense and more sense than most, went out with 2 women to the river in the afternoon to draw water from the hole in the ice they kept open with spear points. They did not go alone. 3 Ironborn went with them because Theon had made that rule, and he knew now that some rules should be hugged like heat. They were quick and they were not foolish. The thing that took them was more patient than quick. It waited until they had filled 2 buckets. It shot the younger Ironborn in the throat so the others would look at him and put their hands out, and then it stepped forward with nothing on its face. The women ran. The thing took the foundling girl by the hair and drew a knife along her scalp. Not to cut her throat, not to bleed her, but to draw the hair back from her head like a skin. She screamed as any creature would. The men on the wall saw, and it happened too quickly for a shot. The thing looked up and their eyes met over the white plain. Theon did not think he had ever truly hated any man in his life before. He hated then. He hated with the clean, purifying heat a man feels when he finds the point of himself. Then the thing left the girl and ran, and it ran with that peculiar, ugly grace of men who enjoy their bodies too much. Theon leaped from the wall to the steps and took 3 at a time and was in the yard and at the gate and out before any man could stop him. Asha was a lighter shape at his shoulder, a measured breath at his back. Black Lauren was a curse at his side. Wex came as if drawn on a string. They ran across the white and the world shrank to breath and heart. The thing, Ramsay, it must have been Ramsay, went into the thin copse of young birch and was gone from sight as if swallowed. Theon did not slow. He went into the trees and felt the change in the sound, and the world said now quietly in his ear. He turned left because the man who ran had favored his left foot a hair's width. And there was the movement in the brush, and Theon gave himself to it. He did not remember afterward exactly what happened, only the feel of the knife in his hand and the short distance between him and the one he hated and the astonishment of a face naked of expression. He remembered the sound of Asha's breath and the exact shape of Black Lauren's curse and the way Wex stood with his small knife in his hand as if it were an altar. He remembered that he did not kill. He remembered that Ramsay's cheekbone under his knuckles felt like a stone under thin water, hard and wet, and that when his hand came up again it was bloody. He remembered a laugh that did not belong to any man he respected. And then there were men in the trees, and there were more men behind them, and Theon understood he had run into a trap and endured in it long enough only because the bastard had been surprised to find that his prey could also hunt, and then he understood he would die if he did not move. He moved. He moved as men move who have the shape of their death before them like a candle in a row of candles and have chosen the next one. He moved sideways and tasted blood and kicked underbrush and put his knife where he thought a thigh would be and was right. He moved and moved and moved. Asha's hand caught his collar at one point and jerked him, and he went with it, trusting her without seeing. Lauren's shoulder hit him and moved him again. Wex made a small sound at one point that Theon would hear in his dreams, not of fear but of surprise, the sound men make when a coin falls into their hand from nowhere. Theon's breath burned. The trees thinned, the white opened, Theon ran. They gained the gate. Theon stumbled and went to his knees and spat. Men grabbed him and hauled and shoved him through. Someone shouted for a healer. Someone shouted for more men. Someone shouted his name like a curse and a prayer, and he could not tell which, and it did not matter. He shoved to his feet. He went to the wall. He looked down at the foundling girl. Her hair was in clumps around her head. Her face was white. The skin at her hairline bled little dark beads. "You'll live," he said. "You will. You will have a story." She stared at him. Her eyes were the exact color of the river ice in that light. She did not seem to know his face. He was not sure he knew it either. That night he dreamed of the sea again. This time it was not forgiving. This time the waves were iron and they cut him. In the morning he woke changed. It was not a change that showed in his hands or his voice. It lay deeper, where a man harbors the image of himself. He had let that image be made for him before, by his father, by Ned Stark, by Robb, by the slow hands of his own wanting. He took it back. He set it on the anvil the smith used for straightening nails. He put the hammer to it and shaped, not to make something new but to make what was already there disclose itself. When he came into the yard, the men felt it because men feel such things. Luwin felt it and did not hide his relief. Asha felt it and nodded once. "We will not run," Theon said, as if he had not already said that, because the words needed breath on this day. "We will not parley except to mock. We will not burn this place to keep the bastard from having it. We will hold it against him and against the hunger and against our own hands. We will hold it so that when spring comes, if it ever comes, those who come to claim it will find it whole and find men to open its gates who are not bowed. We will hold it because we can." No cheer greeted him. Men do not cheer when they are cold and hungry, and the promise is only of more cold and more hunger. They set their mouths and went to work. Small incidents made the shape of the days thereafter. A fox in the chicken coop. A fire that smoldered in the bakery for 3 days under the floor and was stamped out by girls without a man's help. A child born in the laundry to a woman who had not planned on birthing that child within walls and who named him Clay because of the clay the women used to scrub grease from pans. A tooth pulled by the maester from a man who wept afterward, not with pain but with gratitude, and then spread his hands and showed anyone who would look the hole where the pain had lived. Returned from a 3-day voyage along the river with news that Lord Wyman had taken to riding a horse because the paths in the city were too thick with wet to walk, and he had made a joke about his girth and men had laughed because the world had one less complaint to hold and they were eager to let it go. Theon stood on the wall with dirt on his boots and listened and did not mistake any of it for safety. He thought of Robb and the letter he had sent into a world that could gobble men whole without leaving a fingernail behind. He thought of how many ways there were for a man to be a brother or a traitor or a something in between no songs could carry. He went to the weirwood and stood again. The face bled its red sap and did not speak. He pressed his palm to the bark and felt the living running there. He drew his hand away and looked at the pattern the sap had made on his skin, a red stigmata that meant nothing and everything. He rubbed it between his fingers and it smelled faintly of resin and something like plums. He laughed once softly, the laugh a man makes when he is not unamused but also not moved to give himself away. He turned back toward the yard and the sound of hammers and boys shouting and the smell of bread. The women had made oatcakes that morning with bits of dried apple in them. He took one and ate it as he crossed the yard. Children watched him eat. He broke the last third in two and handed one piece to the nearest boy and one to the boy's sister, who regarded him solemnly and then took the cake with both hands. "We will live," Theon said to no one and everyone. It was not a boast. It was not even a promise. It was a line. He meant to walk it. He meant to see where it led. To a hall with men from houses that had hated one another sitting and taking the same bread. To a gate opening to a man he once called brother. To a field where he would die. To a bed where he would gray and listen to rain on the roof. He would take any of those if he had earned them. He would take death too, if that was the shape the world took after the last horn. The shadows that evening were longer. The sky had a lighter quality under the high clouds. Asha sat by the gate counting arrows and making notes on a slate as if each mark was a coin and she a thrifty woman with her thumb wet. Lauren sharpened a knife and told a dirty joke to a man who had gone 2 months without a girl and needed a laugh to keep his hands honest. Luwin held Clay, the winter child, and the baby reached for the maester's chain, and the old man bent his head to kiss a small, soft skull. Wex wiped his knife and made a new sign in the air and showed it to Theon. It was a circle with a line through it. Theon nodded and said, "Hold," and Wex smiled. And in that smile Theon saw the boy as a man at 40 with a broad back and a quiet wife and work he did with his hands and pride. Beyond the ditch the woods waited. They would wait forever if they had to, and that knowledge no longer made Theon's heart race. It slowed his heart instead, gave it a pace to keep. He stood with his back to the warm stones and the cold in his lungs and the sense that he had been rewritten by this place and this place had been written by all those before him, and he reached for the hilt of his sword and rested his hand there without drawing. He did not look for the bastard. He did not look away. He watched the line between white and black and kept breathing, and when night came he went to his bed and lay down and slept, and in the deep core of sleep where men go when they trust the walls they have made, he dreamed of a door opening, not to let out men with torches, but to let in a man bearing a wolf's banner that was not gray wind nor summer nor shaggy dog nor ghost, but simply a piece of cloth, clean, with a dire wolf sewn in thread as gray as a sky when rain is certain. He woke before dawn and smiled once in the dark, unseen, and rose and set his feet to begin again. He put his hand on stone and felt the heat and said, in a voice that had been shaped by 2 gods and by winter and by a sister's laughter and by a boy's knife, "Hold," and went to see that it did.